Right, good afternoon everyone, and it is a real honor and privilege to be here with you this afternoon. I've got the opportunity to stand up and shake my legs, and I suggest maybe quickly just stand up, shake your legs, get the circulation going. It's a little bit chilly in here, so great, so you can take your seats when you're ready. And just to say a little bit, and in fact this opening slide here is the gentleman who was chirping just now is from his herd, and it's actually going to be on the National Bull Sale this week, and I didn't actually realize that. So my background is actually vegetables and cropping, and so I'm feeling a little bit out of my depth. I thought, well, you know, maybe it's because the organizers of this event today thought they would keep the best until last. However, having listened to Doug and Colleen and the expertise that is coming forth today, I'm like, that's a tough call to follow. And not being a real livestock expert myself, and I mean, especially, how can you compete with a uterus hanging up here on the front stage? I mean, Doug, I don't know where you found that from, but anyway. And also just to say that I'm not totally ignorant of livestock. I am a big, emphasis on big, capital B-I-G, sheep farmer. And that's because I believe everything that Doug tells me. And so just before the COVID pandemic, I went down the road to Tinwell and I bought a couple of sheep, the nice indigenous fat-tailed sheep. And that has definitely become another passion of mine, but that's aside. And I was bleating, and excuse the terminology linked to sheep, I was bleating at Doug, saying, Doug, I've never injected anything in my life before. And I was trying to persuade him to send his vet assistant to help with vaccinations. And he's like, Sandi, you are a big, B-I-G, capital letters, farmer now. So that's what I tell everyone. I'm a big sheep farmer. Anyway, that aside. So moving on, change. So Michael this morning was talking about change. We cannot get away from it. Whether you are stuck in the middle of the bush somewhere and think that's fine, I don't need to go to Harare, that's where all the chaos is. Change is with us every step of the way, and it is accelerating. And I don't know if you noticed that in 2020, our cabinet decreed that we needed to review our agroecological zones. And so for those of you who are not from Zimbabwe, we have 5 different zones here in Zim. We have Region 1, which is the high rainfall area, which is that dark green that is on the eastern side of the country, right down to the really dry, hot conditions in the south, particularly, which is Region 5, which has less than 300 mils of rainfall. So they decided that the work that was done, which is the left-hand map here, in the 60s, between 1945 and 1960, is outdated. And we needed to get a new one, which is the one on the right. And unfortunately, we're seeing that regions 1, 2, and 3 have shrunk and have been taken over by regions 4 and 5. And in fact, we have now regions 5A and 5B, where right down in the south, which is the red part, they're calling 5B, which is not even good for small grain sorghum crops. So it makes you think, you know, even though we're sitting in the middle of the bush somewhere, that we are having to deal with change that is happening in and around us that we've had no control over, but the understanding of which is so important. And just as a matter of interest, I'd love to see in the audience here, who is farming in regions 4 and 5? By raising of hands. We've got a couple of people. Wow, they're the strong ones. And to the rest of you, regions 1, 2, and 3, I'm assuming that's where you're coming from. How many people do we have in the audience today who are dairy farmers? Okay, great. So we've got a couple of dairy farmers here. How many of you are just doing beef cattle, no cropping, no orchard crops, you're just doing straight beef? Okay, great. Interesting to see. We've got a real mixed bag. And those of you who kind of doing the crops and then the beef are also there as well, or dairy, or you're doing kind of combination of crops and mixtures, great. Okay. Wow, so mixed bag. So it's a broad topic that I've got to look at today, and it's about building fodder banks. And I have been given my mandate, and it's quite a big topic, and I'm going to try and get through as much as we can to start off with. As everyone has said, is that currently we are facing challenges as a nation in that the profitability of our farming operations is really being squeezed. I've heard from someone the other day about stagnating producer prices going back as far as 2009. I mean, that's significant. Costs are soaring. Colleen has just shown us about, gave us a graph there about how the costs are soaring, going up, the diminishing returns, debt cycles. So we know, we understand. We're right in the middle of this quagmire right now. I have to say, though, and I was fortunate enough to be awarded a Nuffield Farming Scholarship, and I've just come back from a 5-nation tour. And as has been said again several times, it's not just a Zimbabwean issue, it's a worldwide phenomenon. And yes, we know that if somewhere in the rest of the world coughs and sneezes, we catch the cold. So Ukraine effect, COVID, whatever you want to call it, just generally. And these are pictures that I've taken on my tour around from a 40-head dairy unit in India to a 26,000 dairy unit in Qatar in the middle of the desert. Everyone is talking about the same issue, about the profit margins. So we're not alone in all of this. So just how do we look about increasing on-farm profitability? And it was mentioned by Colleen, we do tend to go for, the biggest mombi and, the biggest and the best and the top yields that we're looking for. But what is our profitability? What is it actually costing us? And what is your main cost driver as livestock producers, as beef and dairy? And we've got very clever people in this country who can give you that lowdown. I mean, I contacted Jacko Erasmus, and I'm like, Jacko, tell me, what is the profitability of beef? And he's got a whole spreadsheet, and he gives you a summary, and so they can tell you exactly what it is. But in a lot of cases, it's about that lean season between July, August through to November until our rains come. And we hope that the rains come. Okay? And especially for this year as well. The predictions are not looking good, and we hope that the assumptions that have been used in modeling it are hopefully a little bit flawed or maybe don't come about. But how do we increase our profitability? How do we build a fodder bank on the farm? And so I just wanted to kind of, in this talk, not go into any depth. And we've got nutritionists here that talk about the dry matter content, the protein content, all that sort of thing. I just want to throw out ideas. And I hope that you're going to catch something. Because the big question is, why are you here today? Are you looking for something new, something interesting, or are you just here to socialize? It's like, how is your farming operation going? And are you just interested in carrying on the same old, or is there something that needs to change? Because we are under new ecological, it's been evolving over time, we're under pressure from the economics. And so I want to just talk about a fodder bank and the importance of having your own fodder bank. Now, there's a saying, I attended an economics course, and they said, what you gonna do with what you got? And I happened to be sitting under a preacher man one day, and he was talking about, what do you have in your hands? And the analogy was Moses with his rod, and how he threw it down, it became a snake, and how he hit the water and parted the Red Sea, and they did all sorts of things. But it was like, what have you got in your hands? As farmers, what do you have in your hands? What do you have at your disposal? And I hope today that I'm going to expand your thinking a little bit and to try and see things in a slightly different light and say, I never realized that. Maybe I should try something new here. So, looking at fodder bank options, and I'm coming from a cropping perspective as well, and I'm trying to keep it simple. And I'm taking a feather out of Michael's book today about keeping it simple, because we humans tend to complicate things. And so I want to try and keep it simple here. So we're looking at permanent pastures, annual pastures, and crops. And so obviously there's the green chop, the baling, and the combination of grazing, baling, and all of those sort of things. Silage production that Colleen was mentioning, crop rotations, intercropping, and also the orchard interrows. There's so many different options that are out there and available. And you think, well, where do I start? How do I start? And so the questions you've got to ask yourself are literally, what am I trying to achieve here at the end of the day? How am I going to do that? And am I prepared to change things? Folks, there's definite cognitive dissonance. And what does that mean? It's about changing your mindset and looking at things in a new way, because sometimes what we have been taught and what we believe is true, it's not quite as true as we thought it was when we first started. But the belief system is there, so starting to shift mindsets is one of the key focus areas. And I know we've got really progressive farmers here in the room, and they're prepared to test our boundaries and try out new things. But some of us are still prepared to hang with the old. So the decision-making process, and there is, such a thing as, decision-making tree, what are you deciding, what are you looking at? And it has a lot to do with where you are at, you the farmer. And a lot of us, we want to be given a script. This is what you're going to do, this is how you're going to do it, and hey presto, you're going to make billions of dollars at the end of the day. But it's all about you and where you are located. It is so important. I spoke about regions 1 versus regions 5. Your location, your geographic and climatic conditions of how that is impacting your decision-making process. What equipment do you have available? So not all of you are crop farmers. Some of you are you are doing beef cattle ranching. But you don't have a whole lot of equipment. Maybe you have a tractor and trailer, you might have a mower, but that's about it. What equipment do you have available? Management capacity, and not everyone wants to be cropping, planting, harvesting, dealing with all of that things all the time. I understand that. What labor availability do you have? Right in the middle of the Bundu, how much labor do you have available? Some of you might be close to a town and you've got sources of labor. If you're not battling with the blueberry farmers, that is, because they use, I'm talking about 400 people that they're taking on right now for harvesting their blueberries. Also, what do you want to do? Have you got equipment for baling? No. Well, then you're looking more at grazing. What about green chop? So it's really about what you're looking at. Just a quick one. That picture there is a mixture of oats and fodder peas. Interesting combination, but I'm going to come on to that later. And if I remember, I'm going to try and illustrate some of the pictures that I have, discuss them as well. The decision-making process, good old Rhodes grass there as well. Are you looking at summer or winter? What's the time of the year we're looking? It's very specific about what plants you're going to be planting or not. Irrigation versus dry land. I was just talking to someone in the audience earlier, and they've got center pivot irrigation down in Mwenezi. And you think, well, Mwenezi is hot, dry, and everything else. But it's a great opportunity for baling and selling bales in the area. In fact, if you've got hay bales in Mwenezi right now, they're going for $3 a bale. And they can't produce enough. And then they're paying for transport on top of that. So in certain key areas, it's a great business opportunity. Annual versus perennial. What are your long-term plans? And what are you wanting to do? Available land, is it arable? Is it not? And of course, the budget. And I just want to flag here to farmers, because often we grow our own crops and we don't allocate a true value to that seed. And we think it's not for free because we've taken up opportunity costs on the land. It's the tractors and things like that. And so a great one it's a common one here in Zim, is sun hemp. So it's awesome that you can grow your sun hemp seed, but don't put a zero cost on your own seed, because there is a budget. And although probably the best way to do it is on farm if you've got available land, but just remember there is a cost attached to that. What is your budget? How deep are your pockets? So let's start with regions 4 and 5, the brittle environments. So we all know them, so the Masvingo province, I've spoken about Wanezi in the south that we're looking at. So our hands are tied with regards to irrigation unless you have access to water and you have a center pivot. You're really focusing on felt restoration, how you're managing your grazing through adaptive grazing techniques. You can also look at adding drought-resistant local indigenous grass mixes that will do really well. And just interesting in all of this, in the United States, a colleague of mine that is in the business was talking about 1 million kgs of beef per hectare. So we're obviously talking livestock units per hectare. That's our traditional way of looking at things. But there's been a sort of slight shift in certain areas about looking at the kgs of beef per hectare. And obviously in that sort of situation, they were moving them every hour. Electric fencing is a big part of this. It's all about, the type of the grazing that you are doing, the grazing management. But the good news is that you can improve your felt quite radically by the way you're managing your grazing. And so just going on and sticking to the basics, many of you know this, and you don't need to be a rocket science to understand it. From a grazing and a crop and a plant point of view, it just makes a whole lot of sense that you don't graze it right down to 90% if you're wanting to regenerate and get the regrowth coming back. The roots just die back. If it grows back and doesn't die off, it'll take much longer to do so. So if you remove 70% of your plants, 50% of the roots stop growing for 17 days. But if you take 50% of your plant, you leave half of it, you still got a significant amount of roots there that will reflush. So grazing management is absolutely critical. And I think more and more we're turning away from what I gather from the livestock industry. We're turning away from the luxury grazing that has been what we've been doing in the past. So I mentioned about reinforcing your felt with indigenous local grasses. And I'm saying here, planting grass is actually a misnomer. You don't want to bury that grass seed. Trust me, you won't get anything coming back. And I want to say that standard rules still apply. So if you're going to put seed into a highly, congested area like that, you're not going to see anything germinate. It doesn't like the competition. It's fairly obvious. So what some people do, and unfortunately if there's a bushfire and it's been burnt, that's an ideal time to start reseeding, and you hope that you don't get a bushfire. Or they graze it down so that there's no competition, and then they're applying the new seed. If you can lightly sclarify and fluff up the surface a little bit, a disc harrow that has been straightened, the harrow's part has been straightened, or a spring tine, and then you can actually plant the seed. You apply the seed, and if you can roll, but otherwise the rain, the compaction of the rain will help you in that one. So just a quick one. Rhodes grass, Chloris guyana, is a common one that we all know. It's a local indigenous grass. You mix that with something like Panicum maximum, you mix it with Smuts finger grass, that combination does extremely well. And in fact, again, under a center pivot in the Wanezi area, it's been so prolific. It's done really great for hay bales and things like that. So I'm just wondering, I think it's my next slide, how to plant. Yes, it is. So Osmond, do you mind if I ask you to bring those ones up for me? Obviously, again, basic principles, folks. It doesn't go out the window just because we're planting something for a fodder bank. Seed size is important. We have some large seeds, we have some small seeds. and how do you do it? And I've got some pictures that I'm going to be posting a little bit later. But a lot of the farmers saying, but I don't have the equipment. Well, we as Zimbabwean farmers, we make a plan. And a lot of what we do is very simple, it's practical. And so I just want to throw out here, so we can plant by hand, and you can broadcast, mainly that's for grass seeds. You can also do it by hand, which we've also demonstrated at our farm. But just quickly, this is something I brought from my garden. And I am not, I just want to share with you, because this is under $100. And it's like a mini Vicon. It's got a spinning wheel there, and it's a mini Vicon, but it's actually originally for fertilizer spreading for lawns. But something like this would be so useful and so easy for distributing seed on an area that you maybe can't get a tractor in or something like that. Obviously, basic calibration is going to be really important. So that's just an interesting one. The other one is when you're distributing grass seed, it's generally quite low. And if you're doing it by hand, you want to probably just use a kind of a square chigubu like this. You know, the ones that people have sat on and break the top because they can't take 60 kgs of weight. So you chop off the top. You're laughing. They do become really good seeds. But what happens is that you've got to string up your guys, and excuse the terminology, but I'm serious. You've got to put a rope around their waist, 2 meters apart, because we Zimbos are a very friendly bunch and we like talking to one another. So the rope that's 2 meters apart is to help keep our lines when we are walking in the field. So I'm going to demonstrate, and that's going to be quite difficult without the microphone, but I wanted to show you just a simple methodology that can be done very easily. Right, so you've got your seed, and here you would take a handful of it out, and so as they are all walking in a line together, 2 meters apart, keeping that rope tight, you are walking and going in an arc and scattering the seed. So as they are walking, by the time you get the next handful out, you've reached the edge of that seed arc and you're scattering the seed. So you've got this line of people 2 meters apart doing the same thing and covering the soil. So it's a very simple, easy methodology. Obviously, if you've got trees in the way and you've got other things, you're going to have to make another plan, otherwise they're going to be strung up around the trees. It's got a very simple way of doing things. So don't think you have to have the most incredible machinery, expensive machinery to get the job done. Just thinking a little bit more out of the box will help to, and I got that from a farmer, by the way. So there you go. Obviously, Vicon, line box, whatever you've got. If you're fortunate to have a mechanical planter, and I love the new sort of minimum tillage, zero planting planters that you can get now. I mean, it's great if you've got one of those that cuts through a bit of trash, gets the seed in the ground. You can also put bigger seed and smaller seed into the different boxes, use the fertilizer box as a seed box. There's an amazing amount that you can do. One of the things that has been done by a farmer is to incorporate some of the seeds as their feed. I don't think it's been too successful though, so I wouldn't recommend that you all do it. I just want to mention at the bottom here about grass seed and germination. If you're a veggie grower like myself, your expectation for germination is well into the 90s. So let me tell you, with grass seed, that is not the case. You're looking at probably between 20 to 35% as the kind of limit for the germination for grass seed. So just be aware of that. If you are collecting your own grass seed, and a lot of farmers do, and they're using it, you need, a decent amount, and don't think, oh, these millions of seeds, not all of them are going to be germinating. And that, by the way, I'm sure you all know, is a bit of forage sorghum. So going on to regions 1, 2, and 3, permanent pastures, you need irrigation. It's going to be very difficult to do permanent pastures of high yielding, that sort of thing. You will need irrigation for that. And so if you haven't got irrigation, it probably isn't worth investing in the seed, because the seed for these permanent pastures, if you're looking at kikuyu or stargrass and you're looking at putting in other mixtures for it, it probably isn't worth your while doing unless you've got permanent pastures. So the dairy guys are well into this. They know their story. They've got this well sorted out. You obviously have different types of permanent pastures. And this here is white clover. Did anybody spot the white clover in the lawn outside? One person. Did you know you were trampling on white clover in the lawn? Go out and have a look at it. It's just an amazing legume. It's a really good one. So single species. People are talking about lucerne pastures. Kikuyu, stargrass, and ryegrass. So you get the annual and the perennial ryegrass. You can also have Rhodes grass as it's a really good pasture. Generally, that's probably the one that you can do dry land. It's got good foggage. Foggage is like standability, good protein, and it does really well. I want to touch briefly on lucerne, because it's been a bit of a mixed bag here in Zim, and there's certainly a lot of interest that is being created from a couple of international organizations that have come through from Asia that are looking for lucerne bales. Now, I'm not talking about these little ones. I'm not talking about those round ones. I'm talking about huge square ones that kind of fit straight into a container. And they're looking at being close to a railway line to ship them out. The best place for lucerne is actually in the low veld under irrigation. So where we've tried here, up in Manicaland and, other places, where you get a lot of rain, it makes it quite difficult to get a lot of kind of leaf spot and the leaves drop, and that's what you want to keep to feed to the animals. And so if you've got lucerne, that's probably the most ideal areas to be growing it. If you've got lucerne hay bales, they certainly seem to be really profitable as well. And then there's export market to be looking at. Interesting one there. There's other mixed species that you can get for your pastures. And I put 12 to 16 species. Now, to be quite honest, except for a very few people, this is like radical thinking. And on my tour, and the people that I've been meeting, speaking to the English, to the Aussies, to the Kiwis, to the whole bang shoot, they are all going for these multiple species pasture crops, where you're mixing your legumes together with your grasses and your brassicas, and they call them forbs. It's like the other range. And there's a whole science that's going behind this. My passion is regenerative agriculture. Talk about cognitive dissonance. I was taught in the conventional way of farming and have been growing and investing in time and finances in upskilling and understanding, and you don't know what you don't know at the end of the day. And just talking about the microbiome in the soil, I mean, Colleen was talking about it in the rumen and the gut health. It's incredible what we are learning these days, and that has a lot to do with mixed species. So a lot of the people that I'm talking to, and these are organic dairy farmers and conventional farmers, that they're putting in, they will use, like in a mix, 4 to 5 clovers in a pasture mix. And you're like, but you've got one clover. It's the legume. It's nitrogen fixing. But they're using a combination because they're understanding the value of what it's also contributing to the soil and the other plants that are in there. And in fact, I think this is quite small. The one farmer I was talking to was talking about 21 species in his mix. So just interesting changes and dynamics that are happening out there in the industry. Right, to permanent pastures, if you're looking at your kikuyus or your ryegrass pastures, what a lot of people are doing now is giving additives. Sorry, it looks a little bit blurry here. But putting in lucerne with that, some chicory, some plantain, some clovers, and the different types of clovers, and adding like a kg of each and putting it per hectare in the pastures. And what they're finding there is that the need for inorganic fertilizers starts dropping off and becomes far less because you've got your nitrogen fixing. You've got your root crops like the chicory and the plantain and the lucerne. So that's something, just kind of giving you a couple of examples for that. And so Colleen was touching on silage and talking about the nutrient health of silage. And this is actually a picture that I took, gosh, I think that was in Germany, of their silage and how they're making it there. It's absolutely amazing, using old tires to keep the plastic down. Obviously, maize here in Zim is the most common. And as Colleen alluded, you can make bad silage as well. And a lot of people, if it looks like it's going to be a poor maize season, they'll try and ensile their maize but not get a really good quality at the end of the day. What I want to throw out here, though, is intercropping with legumes. And I know we've got a farmer who's got a feedlot in Macheki who is intercropping and working with just our ordinary sun hemp, cowpea kind of mix in the maize and building up the protein side. There's obviously practical aspects to this because if you're using a herbicide, what herbicide are you using? It's a broadleaf herbicide with maize. And so whatever you put herbicide down, you're going to probably have to leave it for about 6 weeks before you can plant with your legume, so sun hemp or your cowpeas. So you need to just be aware of, what's the residual herbicide in the soil, what timing that you're planting, and sometimes it might be too late because now the maize has grown too high and it's kind of blocked out and shaded out the legume that's there. So just be aware. The other thing as well, Lab is a brilliant one. It's vigorous, it grows strong, it's drought resistant. But if you have a silage cutter that's not strong enough, you'll find those tendrils will go around the cutter and cause mechanical issues. So just be aware. I mean, all I'm try it out, explain, and I'm sure the networking within the room, you'll find that farmers amongst you have been doing your own sort of tests and experiments there. Sweet sorghum. This is the sorghum hybrid. It's the one that's the high sugar one. We have a forage sorghum as well that is a sorghum Sudan grass hybrid, and that also works well for grazing. But this is the one that's used for silage. The big question is, do you graze it? Is it a multi-cut and then you ensile? How many times can you graze it? What are you looking at? And there's lots of options, folks. And it all depends on where you've got irrigation, what are your objectives, are you wanting to graze it, how low are you going to graze it? All of these things are so critically important. And how is it going to contribute to your stock feed, to your health of your animals? Things like, when do you calve as well? When are you planning on calving side? Utilization, fodder bank, this is what we're talking about. So do you want to just put it in the silage pit? Do you want to bale it and store it? And this is a big one for a lot of the tobacco farmers have Rhodes grass as a rotation, and they want to keep it as in storage and keep it in the field. The problem with that is you need a whacking great big barn or plastic, or I know that in Australia they've got now these hard plastic kind of things that interlock and they keep the water off the top of a big stack like that one. So it's all about your objectives and what you're wanting to do with it. Whether you feed it as green chop, if you've got the equipment to cut and send it straight to your mombies and your dairy herd or your feedlot or wherever you're sending it to, with obviously input from a nutritionist. So it's all these options that you're going to be looking at for your fodder bank side of things. And this is a obvious one that they're going in there that looks like a forage sorghum, and they've decided to graze it. Sometimes it's much easier to put the cattle in to do what they need to do than to go to the effort of cutting, baling, or fuel, transport, all of those sort of things. And you know what the great thing with this as well is all that poop and urine and saliva goes back into the field right where they are. And folks, what you must understand right now, and this has been the whole mindset shift for me that we have ignored traditionally in conventional agriculture, is we are humans living in a microbial world. And that soil microbiome is so important at the end of the day. So I'm going to get off that one because I'm going off tangent. Just going on to baling and conserving feed. So this is like the big equipment. It's the top end that I was talking about, and I didn't find any small equipment that I wanted to show you earlier. And it's what are you looking at? Obviously, if you've got permanent pastures, you do need to look after them. You're going to have to put in a lot of time and effort into maintaining them to make sure that they are good quality. If you have a mixed crop and you're baling it, so I mentioned the three grasses, Rhodes, Smuts, Panicum, they're all pretty good and they'll dry off and they'll be, they'll dry off all uniformly. You can't bale something that is dry and green because there's something like a brassica you put in there, maybe it's a mustard or something like that, that doesn't dry off very well because your hay bale is probably going to start rotting from the inside. So that's really important. I mean, that looks like a cereal crop. I mean, we did a barley, cereal rye, and 2 oats as a mix at Art Farm. We grazed it, but it was something that could have been baled if you had wanted to. So, for example, if you've got a center pivot and you just don't have enough mummies to get around in time, they're grazing what they can eat, and then you can bale the rest. It really is not an either-or situation. It's a very much both and that you can look at. So don't write off one side as opposed to another. It's a both and. Do I just silage it? No, you can graze it or you can cut it and you can ensile it as well. There's different options that you can look at. So this is just another picture of just drying off in the field here. It's obviously quite a good fodder bank that they've produced on their own land. It doesn't mean that you are now paying to import hay bales or other product coming back into your land. I think probably just there we go. What I really want to spend some time on and sort of shift the thinking here a little bit. We have traditionally done crops and we've done our beef cattle. How about looking at integrating the two for the benefit of both? So again, looking at what are we putting in as our crop rotations? Are we looking at also intercropping? What about those of you who are growing pecan nut orchards down in the south? And it can also be done as dry land. And I'm going to have to rush here because of time. Planting dates for dry land. We have a lot of tobacco growers that have got irrigated tobacco that they pop in a cover crop mix right at the end of they pull their tobacco out end of Feb. We still got rains, hopefully, and they'll put in a cover crop mix, and then that will go through towards the end of the summer. But majority can be done as a dry land crop from November through to January, February, March, that we can actually put these cover crop mixes in. So it's where the rains start, when it stops, how do we include it as part of our rotations? And it's the soil health benefits that are so important. Looking at fodder flow planning as well, it was mentioned earlier about, this is just a table with a lot of grasses that are on there. We've got some winter grasses, we've got some summer grasses. When are we wanting them to produce? How much are we wanting to produce? And how many head of cattle are we going to be putting on them? What is the utilization? That's under the column there. Is it for grazing? Is it for foggage? Is it for hay making? So there's a lot of different options that are out there. Buffalo grass, smuts finger, annual ryegrass. There's also fodder radish that kind of got popped in amongst the grasses there. But there's a lot of different things that we can look at. Really interesting one is this teff grass that is third from the bottom. It's an annual grass. It's short. It's knee-high. It's quick. And it's the nicest thing. The cattle just love it. And it holds the soil in place. If you're looking at a new orchard planting, this is a wonderful one to put in to hold the soil against erosion. So just carrying on, annual pastures and what we have that is available in the different family groups that are out there. So yes, we all talk about grasses for the mombies, but they also eat legumes and brassicas, and there's other cereal crops as well, the winter and summer options that we are looking at. So there's a big variety of those ones, and biodiversity, folks, is the main one as well that we're looking at. Biodiversity above ground creates more biodiversity below ground. Your microbiome exists because of the root exudates that come out from the different species. And so we're creating a greater environment of soil health. The stronger your soil health, the better the crops, the better the pastures, the better the rumen health, the better the mombies do at the end of the day. What are the advantages of mixed cover crops? They are numerous. So if you're a tobacco farmer, you've got the nematode resistance. It's scavenging of nutrients, it's fixing nitrogen, it's building organic matter. But they're also really good at feeding livestock. And for the soil, it works really well. Do you fertilize or not? It all depends. And if I sent you this message, I would send a big emoji with a smiley face because it's so irritating when someone says, it depends. Well, it does. I'm sorry. It depends. You know, at Art Farm, we didn't fertilize any of our cover crops, and they grew tall, and it was fantastic. Heavy red soils, strong nutrition. If you're on a sandy soil, they probably won't grow as well. It really depends on your soil health, what you're trying to achieve. I know farmers that have got annual ryegrass pastures that they'll put on 400 or 500 kgs compound. They'll put between 12 to 1,500 kgs of urea on that crop. 6 cuts, 300 kgs every time they cut. So it does depend, and it's a budget thing again. So just obviously worldwide, we know that the fertilizer usage has gone up. It's exponential. We all know that. It's since the the war years, so 1950 when we got that. Gosh, I've only got 5 minutes. I'm going to have to rush. But you can see quickly where the legume seeds, as the nitrogen out of a bag has come out, the legume seed has come down. That's the world seed production. So I'm going to terminate crops, and I don't know if this video is going to work. So there's different ways of terminating cover crops. This is a 3-way mix of forage sorghum, sun hemp, and pearl millet. You can either graze it heavily, you can wait for the frost to take it out, you can use a herbicide, you can disc it, or you can just do a roller crimper. So there's different ways that if you want to terminate it, because you're coming in with another crop, this is one of the ways you can look at doing this. This was just taken on a tobacco farm. Right, just quick one at Art Farm. And some of you have been to the Art Farm field days that we've had there. They had 200 head of cattle. This is yearlings. They bought them as weaners. They had them on the grass veld this time of the year. And we had looked at putting a mixed biodiverse cover crop onto their land, 0.6 of a hectare. And what was happening is that it was really for the crop rotation, but they said, let's do a trial, and we brought 100 of these head of cattle to come in and feed on this mixed cover crop. And so just to show you some of the area here, this was irrigation. They had electric fencing. 100 were given 1,000 square meters that they were able to feed on. This is an area where they've come from. And so what happened, it was a mixed bag of mombies. And this area here was a 9-species mix, including some radishes and brassicas. They weighed them on a weekly basis, and they compared them to the 100 that were on the other side, that were just on the veldt. These guys here, and my apologies for the videography, I need someone like Michelle to be doing this, and I'm just doing this with my camera. These guys here put on an average of 1.3 kgs per day over a 6-week period. Obviously, we started off slowly. You can't introduce from dry veldt into something like this, and you can see how thick and lush it is at the bottom end there, just, instantly. 1 hour today, 2 hours tomorrow, because obviously there were some scours as well. You can see that the previous crop was maize, and I'm just focusing on some radishes that are sticking out. They got the taste of those and started eating those down as well. They really enjoyed that. The livestock that were left on the veldt were also being supplementary fed with cotton cake and a few other things. They were doing 0.3 kgs weight gain per day. The interesting thing with this, and you can see how much of a mixed bag it is, and this is them letting them out at the end of the day. The interesting thing is that they did a calculation, and at that time, this is actually in 2021, they found that it was more viable livestock weight gain here than planting wheat. interesting one. So what happened is that they didn't sell off these mombies at the end. They had to put them back on the fell because they didn't have enough of the cover crop mix. And obviously the cows lost that weight. But I think at $4 a kg for carcass weight or live weight is sold anything between $1.90 to $2.20. So this is something that they looked at and they've expanded since then. So just something of interest. And I said it's a mixed bag because out of that 100, some of them never put on any weight. Some of them at that end of that circuit were putting on 3 kgs a day. They were like running up. But you can see the mixed bag there. Anyway, I just want to bring this one in. Gabe Brown is an amazing guy. He's actually part of the kind of the charge ahead of all of us about how he's increased topsoil from 3 inches to 14 and his organic matter in the soil to 11%. And that's now using cover crops, single mix, biodiverse mix. But where it really started going up was when he brought the grazing into his fields. And so that's where I wanted to just show to you that the mixing of the crops with the livestock is critical for soil health. When you're talking about every 1% increase in organic matter, that's equivalent of 250,000 liters per hectare more water you can store in the soil. Make every mill of rain count. On the second last case study here, there was a trial in South Africa. It was a master's student who was intercropping maize. Brett Muirhead was his name. He did a trial there that it was in Winston, KZN, under a pivot where it was 32 hectares. Half of the pivot had no cover crop mix, the other half did. And this is the kind of the bit of the planting. It was at the 3rd or 4th leaf stage. The species that he had in the trial was a real mixed bag. He had legumes, cowpeas, and the sun hemp, common veg, turnip, which is the brassica, as well as stooling rye. Interestingly, there was a yield difference in the maize of only 800 kgs a hectare. And you say, well, it's only 800 kgs. But it does actually amount by an extra another 3,500 rand per hectare. Soil benefits they didn't calculate, but they're innumerable, as we will find out. So 13.8 tons where he had the cover crop mix. Forage value is what I want you to focus on. So he did the individual kind of rows of turnips, and then he did the combination of them. The worst case scenario of the individual ones was 0.65 tons of dry matter per hectare. The best was 1.9 tons dry matter because he took a section, he weighed it, he dried it, he did whatever. Interesting, the agricultural research in South Africa, their figures are 17 kgs of dry matter equals 1 kg of beef. And I'm sure Colleen will have to confirm whether that's true or not. And at that stage, grade A beef cattle was going for 54 rand per kg. So worst and best case scenario, they made an extra between 2,000 and 6,000 rand per hectare. So the cows were in there eating the stover, getting this extra dry matter, and it was covering their costs. So really interesting to see on that side of things. Case study number 3. So Tanganda orchards. We've got a situation there. They had 800 hectares of macadamia orchards. They wanted to increase it. They also had, it was actually 850 hectares. They had 800 head of mombies. And it was like a problem every year to find grazing in the winter months. This is a photograph that Tony sent me. You can see all his orchards that are going up on the hills there. And this is an old electric fencing thing that he found in the warehouse. So someone had thought about it before, and he put it into his orchard crops where he had the interplanting. What are you going to do? What you going to do with what you got? What's in your hand? And one of the things that one of the farmers up there, not Tony at the time, he put in a mixed cover crop between his orchards, and he said, I disked, I plant, I then rolled, and I forget. And he just left it. So they're in a fortunate position because they're in region 1 rainfall area that they're able to do this. This is in South Africa in a pecan orchard, and it's a bit jumpy. But you can see the cattle there and what they're grazing, and these are opportunities with electric fencing, the way we look at things and how we manage, how it actually works. And again, sorry, just a home video, a bit clunky as well. So you can see the strips that they are working in. And when you're saving on mowing that, and you're saving the fuel, but you're getting the benefit of live weight gain, it's not rocket science. Some cautionary things that I want to just tell you. Prussic acid poisoning is a real thing. If you've got forage sorghum, for example, and you get frosted, you've got to wait for 2 weeks. It's a bit of a hazard. It's the same thing if it wilts. So if you're cutting and you're taking it as green chop, don't wait 6 hours before you feed it to your mumbies. Cut, trailer to the mumbies straight away. Obviously, I've talked about bloat and introducing these new cover crop mixes slowly. Monoculture with stun hemp. There has been problems with sheep with light sensitivity and other issues. If it's mixed, you're fine. Introducing the cover crop slowly for the rumen health, but also watch out for horses. These are a challenge on farms. If you've got forage sorghum in particular, if you've got farm horses, just be careful. So I was going to talk about the forage radishes. Some of them are pulling them out and just feeding them to their livestock. And then there's the big question about red and black sun hemp. That seems to be quite a topical thing right now. And there's distinct differences as to why you would choose them. But for livestock people, red is definitely more palatable for the mombies to eat. So, what one thing would you look at changing today on your farm? It's about a mindset shift. There's a great saying that I just love. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So I hope that out of today's session that you will take something away, question your neighbor, but they know. I know we've got Niels here. It's like he's done a lot of this work already on his own. There's lots of people within the audience here and the Langtons of what they've been doing, of mixing the cropping and the livestock together. It's what are you going to do? What you're going to do with what you got. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.